Hello again everybody, and welcome back to my next collection video. And this time I'm super excited to be bringing you my PlayStation, my Sony PlayStation collection. I want to say PlayStation 1 and yet I don't want to. But this is my collection for the very original Sony PlayStation that came out in the 90s. 1995 I do believe was when it released. So briefly, I'll mention my time with the PlayStation and what it means to me. I didn't have a PlayStation when it first came out. I don't believe that I got my PlayStation until 1990, either late 96 or sometime in early 1997. I remember how myself and my cousins and friends went to rent a PlayStation at a local video store because we'd seen it in there a few times. And we were very, very curious about it because we had been, all Super Nintendo, all Sega Genesis. And we rented one. We went in together, rented the console and 3 games, which the 3 games were Twisted Metal, Warhawk, and Steel Rain, I think was the name of the third one. It was like a military helicopter game. We didn't spend much time with that. I think I've told this story before in a previous video, but if you're hearing it again, I apologize. But it was not as much fun as Twisted Metal and Warhawk, for sure. So, not that long afterwards, I decided I wanted one. So I put one on layaway. At that time, I worked at a retail store in Montana called Shopco. I put the console and Triple Play 97 on layaway and then paid it off. And once I got it out, I was, in gaming heaven. The PlayStation, to me, is my favorite console of all time. Sometimes I want to cheat and call the PS2 as my favorite because of the fact that it's backwards compatible with the PS1 and has on its own an amazing library of games. But I really honestly had the most fun. Maybe it was because it was the right time in my life. I was, a single guy but out on my own. It was just the right console at the right time to just suck me in and waste so many hours of my life. Not that it was a waste, but you know what I'm saying. And I really loved it. And I had so many games, and I rented so many games. I went through so much of that library over the handful of years that I had the PlayStation before I got rid of my PlayStation and all the games that I owned for it back in the early 2000s. Mainly because money was tight, and it was right before I got married, but I was, probably even engaged by that point. So in order to experience the next generation of consoles, I had to get rid of what I had. So that was what I did, and I was very, very remorseful and regretted that decision for a lot of years. Now I don't have a PlayStation console. I want to get one. But I do have a pretty ample library of games. So I'm going to try to make each game that I show go quick, but I'm probably going to make these videos a little bit longer than I did the 360 collection, because the last few videos were like under 10 minutes. So I'm aiming on going through 2 stacks in this video, 2 stacks in a second video, and the last stack in a third video, and maybe some additional thoughts. So anyway, let's jump right on in. And the first game to show off is Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. This was kind of a reboot or reimagining of the Alone in the Dark series that had started a few years beforehand. Excuse me. The very first Alone in the Dark game that was on the PlayStation 1, and I think something else, maybe the Sega Saturn, was very crude looking, but it set the table, in my opinion, for what became the Resident Evil series. This kind of updated the Alone in the Dark series into more of a modern style. It's a really, it's a really good game, but when compared to, say, the Resident Evil games, it just seems kind of like a clone. Which is funny, because like I said, the Resident Evil games are essentially a clone of the early Alone in the Dark games. Alright, next up we have Alundra. And if you want to hear some more thoughts about this, this is in my favorite games series. Check that out. Here's a fun game. It's a game called Apocalypse. And as you can see at the top, it says Bruce Willis, and you got Bruce Willis's face here. try to piece together what I remember about this game, at least how it was supposed to be originally. In the original version of this game, your main character was going to be Bruce Willis. I mean, it was played by Bruce Willis, and you were going to control Bruce Willis, and he was going to talk, and Bruce Willis did the motion capturing and the facial whatever, and all the voice work, all the dialogue and whatnot was all done by Bruce Willis, and it was going to be him, and he was going to be the star. And then for some reason, Activision decided to change that. I don't know if that was their decision, if there was an issue with Bruce Willis. I don't quite remember the details of it now. But in the end, the game became where you played as a different character, and Bruce Willis's character was sort of an AI-controlled second player that helped you out and shouted out encouragement and whatnot, and they kind of weeded out lines from all the dialogue that he did to supply that. But they just kind of booted him to the side in a little bit of a way, which is, whatever. The game itself... Now, you know what? I'm actually getting it confused. I think he originally was supposed to be the sidekick, because now that I look at it, it says, take control of Bruce Willis. So maybe I'm getting my stories confused. He was originally supposed to be the sidekick, and they turned him to the star of the game. Anyway, Google it or something like that if you want to know more about it. I don't quite remember now, obviously, because I just got the story mixed up. It's an okay game. I tried to play it last year, and the thing I was struck by was the fact that, man, if you don't get all the way through to a certain part of the level and get that checkpoint, you start right back at the beginning, and I hate that kind of gameplay. I'm so glad that games nowadays are essentially easier. Okay, up next is Armorines Project Swarm. I've never played this. I picked it up because it was cheap. Same thing goes for this. ATV Mania, one of the many ATV games that have been out over the years. I've never played it. It was just a cheap pickup, as was ATV Quad Power Racing. Next up we have Battle Arena Toshinden 3. All I can really tell you about the Battle Arena Toshinden games is that they were pretty popular in the early days of the PlayStation, but when games like Tekken and Mortal Kombat and even some of the Street Fighter games that were out at the time came along, this one just kind of got shoved to the back. Tekken, for me, was probably the best fighting games out around the time that this was out. But those were really popular games. I think especially in Japan, they were like the prevalent fighting series for the longest time. Up next we have Battle Tanks Global Assault. I showed off a couple Battle Tanks games for the N64 when I did that collection, including the version of this one that's for the N64. Alright, here's a fun game that I really enjoy. This is a Squaresoft game, Battle Arena, Brave Fencer Musashi. I have the 3-word title stuck in my brain, I guess. This has just as an aside, has a playable demo for Final Fantasy VIII in it. But this game here is really interesting. It's more of an action RPG and a very linear style, like almost kind of like Crash Bandicoot, in that you can really only go one certain path and you have to interact and avoid and platform around things in that little path. It's a very fun, lighthearted style game, but I really, really enjoyed it. Here's a game here called Broken Helix. The main thing I can tell you about this is Bruce Campbell takes on the voice acting role of your main character in this. The game is pretty pedestrian, although I actually kind of really like it, although it may just be because of the fact that Bruce Campbell talks you through it. Alright, next up is a game called Builder's Block. This is a game I had never heard of, but it was a cheap purchase that I made in the last year or so. Same as this one, card games. This is just a generic card game collection for the PlayStation, like a budget title. Never have played that. Next up here is one of the best games on the PlayStation 1, a game that I really enjoy, but I have not given it enough time. It's Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Quite often will be on a lot of top 10 lists for the best PlayStation games released for the console. Up next here we have Chrono Cross. And this is the sequel to Chrono Trigger from the Super Nintendo, which is one of my favorite older games, older RPGs. Chrono Trigger was one of the first 2 RPGs I played before Final Fantasy VII. So this is just a better looking, graphically advanced game, and kind of fell in line with all the Square games that were coming out around that time. I haven't played a whole lot of it, but it was interesting. Doesn't quite pull me in like Chrono Trigger did, though. Here is a trilogy of games that I am particularly fond of, although I haven't played them in ages. We have Colony Wars 2 Vengeance, and Colony Wars 3 Red Sun. This one, unfortunately, is missing the back piece. But the Colony Wars games, in my opinion, were amazing. Space shooter games. I've never played a Star Fox game, but I'd like to feel that this is a game that kind of would rival a Star Fox game without the lighthearted and, animal characters. Excuse me. They're just really amazing. That's a series that I'm so sad that nothing new Colony Wars has come out, or did come out for the PS2, for the PS3, and I've never heard anything about reviving that series. It would definitely be worth it for some of the newer consoles. Alright, up next we have a game called Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn. At first glance, to some, this would just look like a real cheap kind of rip-off of a Metal Gear Solid or a Siphon Filter. And it is, except it's really good. In my opinion, it's really a good game. Voice acting and the story and stuff is kind of cornball, but it's worth a look, considering that it's probably a cheaper pickup nowadays. Up next we have Crusaders of Might and Magic. Don't know anything about this game, but picked it up relatively cheap. Up next we have a game that's based on a comic book, done by the same guy who did my absolute favorite comic book, which is called Gen 13. But this is a video game for Danger Girl, and this is J. Scott Campbell's property here. This game I've played a little bit long ago when I rented it, and it was cool and everything. This comic never really did anything for me because it's like female, bonds. It's kind of a spies. Doesn't really say anything back here. Espionage themed thrill ride. So, but his artwork is amazing, and one of these days I'm going to do some videos that touch on my comic book favorites, my favorite comic books and whatnot. Next up here is a game called Darkstone. All I can say is that this looks like sort of like a Diablo clone. I haven't played it. Alright, here's another game that has a special story going on with it, so let me tell you all about it here. Dead or Alive, the very original Dead or Alive fighting game from Tecmo. I bought this game for $5. This game, as you see it here, case, bought this for $5, brand new, never been opened, from the Shopko store I worked at in Montana. Have to admit, there was some attraction to this game because of its crazy boob physics, and I said that, boobs. These girls in this game have overinflated boobs, which was such a big trend in gaming at that time, Lara Croft from Tomb Raider and whatnot. But in this game, literally, the female fighters would stand, they would move, they would jump, and their boobs would just go up and down. It was so crazy. Grabbed this game for $5, thought, what the hell, it looks like a crazy fighting game, and it's got this strange boob physics. Got home, opened it up, and inside the case, I'm taking the disc out now, this is what I opened it up to. No game. Brand new sealed, manufacturer's sealed game case with no game inside. I was upset, to say the least, because it was sort of like the Sega Saturn that I bought that didn't work, but at least I could return that. An open game, even though I worked at the store, they probably wouldn't have taken it back. There's copyright laws about that. Anybody could be like, there was no game in it, but take the game home and put it into some sort of a disc binder. So I held on to this case for all these years, and then about a year or so ago, I managed to pick up the disc itself and reunite it with this case, so I would have a full copy of it. Silly story, I know, but those are the fun things about gaming, because almost everything has a story to accompany it. Alright, up next is a game called Death Trap Dungeon. All I can say about this was it came from Eidos, who was putting out the Tomb Raider games at the same time, and some other good titles. It looked really cool. It looked like it was going to have some RPG stuff going on with it. Game came out and it was essentially crap. Here's a game that I really enjoy, even though this is a very early game. It's Die Hard Trilogy. The graphics are kind of poor because of how early the game was. But what was great about this is, as it says, it's the trilogy. It's Die Hard, Die Hard 2, Die Harder, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. A game for each movie, but each game is a different style. The first Die Hard game was a third-person action thing as you went through the skyscraper, and you go through, like, I don't know, I think it's like 100 floors or something, just, you know, killing all the bad guys and finding stuff to progress. Die Hard 2 was an arcade-style, like rail-style shooter game. I'm not a big fan of those, but at least it was a different kind of style. And then Die Hard with a Vengeance is actually a car racing game as you race across New York, finding all the bombs and explosives. And next up we have Die Hard Trilogy 2, which is interesting considering the fact that there weren't new movies out. This is just like a sequel. It was called Viva Las Vegas. I've never played this one, but on the back it looks to be about the same. 3 styles of games done with better graphics. Alright, up next we have Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2. These are awesome games. If you want to know a little bit more of my thoughts on those, check out my Dino Crisis installment of my favorite game series. And then we have a couple of Disney games here. Disney Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Or I should say Disney's Atlantis. And Disney's Story Studio Create and Play in an Interactive Adventure of Disney's Mulan. Both of those games I got because they were cheap. I don't know anything about them. I don't even really know what kind of games that there are. This looks like it's got a bunch of different kinds of games. The Atlantis one looks like it might actually be an adventure style game. Alright, moving on to the second stack here, we've got Dragon Valor. This is a Namco game. This is an RPG. And I just remember reading a lot about it, and it looked interesting, and I'm always looking for new RPGs to add to the collection. Games that will give me lots of hours of enjoyment somewhere down the road. Next up we have the Driver and Driver 2 Twin Pack. This is a greatest hits twin pack that comes with both games in their own special case inside. I love the Driver games. The first Driver game is literally just that. You drive, you're a getaway driver, although you're like an undercover cop. And you have to do a bunch of these missions, getting to one point to another point in so much time, or crashing out another vehicle or whatever. Driver 2, The Wheelman is Back, added the ability to get out of your cars, run around and get into other cars and even shoot. If that wasn't an inspiration for the later GTA games like Grand Theft Auto 3 and beyond, I would be really surprised. Alright, up next we have Duke Nukem Time to Kill. This is probably my favorite Duke Nukem game of all time. And if you know anything about this game, you'll know that it's not a first-person shooter like Doom. It's more of a third-person action adventure style game, almost like Tomb Raider. In fact, some people have called it, what do they call it? Duke Raider or something like that. It just kind of plays out in that kind of a feeling. There's some platforming and some shooting, and you go through a bunch of random points in time on the crazy storyline of Duke Nukem games. Okay, up next we have a game from the developer of Kingsfield, and I mentioned that because I did a favorite games series installment about Kingsfield 2. You're going to see some Kingsfield games as we go through here. But this is a game that was from them. It's called Echo Night. It's a slow game. It kind of has a plodding pace to it, but it's still a good game. And I have a second copy that I got in some sort of an eBay deal in just its own plastic container. And I just realized that something I was trying not to do, but I did it anyway. I skipped over something in the D's that I wanted to show off. At the beginning of my games on my case, because the top shelf is a little bigger than the rest of them, I keep a very special part of my PS1 collection, and that is some long box games. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me show you. This is Destruction Derby for the PlayStation 1. This is in what is called a long box. The very first games that were coming out for the PlayStation 1 were done in these long boxes. This is, I think, this particular copy of Destruction Derby is kind of a thrown together thing, because it has a greatest hits strategy guide, or excuse me, manual in it, and then the disc is in this own little separate plastic piece, and it looks like it has stickers on it for a rental store. So this isn't really what you would call a complete or accurate long box, probably. The outside definitely is, though. But this is Destruction Derby 2 in a regular style case, so there's a size difference to let you know. This is actually more in the size of, say, a PS2 game. Grab something here really quick. This is a PS2 game, so it's actually a little taller than a PS2 game, but they didn't do this for very long. I think just probably like the first year or so, and then they stopped that. Okay, so I have to remind myself to refer to that stack over here as I get to those games. Alright, let's get back into this. Evil Zone. This is a fighting game. I don't believe it's a very good one. It was a cheap pickup. Excalibur 2555 AD. This game is sort of like a Death Trap Dungeon that I covered a few minutes ago. It's a game that I was looking forward to because it looked similar to me to games sort of like Tomb Raider and Death Trap Dungeon and stuff like that. And then I got it, or I checked it out, I at least rented it, and it wasn't so great. Here's a couple of really good games from Eidos. Fear Effect and Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix. These games are amazing due to their art style. You can kind of tell from looking at the characters on the cover. They had a very interesting not animation, but just a very interesting look to the characters. They were also somewhat controversial because they're mature rated, and in the second game, maybe even in the first game it's hinted at, but in the second game you discover that your main character and this girl here are in like a relationship, so you know, ooh, it was the late 90s and video game had lesbian characters in it and everybody freaked out. Alright, now we're going to plow through really quick my Final Fantasy games, because you can refer to my 2 videos about Final Fantasy VII if you want to know more about my thoughts about these. But there's Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy Anthology, Final Fantasy Chronicles, Final Fantasy Origins, Final Fantasy Tactics, and that finishes up my Final Fantasy games for the PlayStation. And I wanted to show off something that I can't believe I forgot about and didn't show off during my Final Fantasy VII videos, but that is my Final Fantasy VII figurines. This is the box set. It says on here Final Fantasy VII Collectible Edition. And what it does is it has Cloud, has Aerith, that's how they name her on the back. I talked a little bit about that in that one video, Aerith or Aerith, whatever. She's listed on here as Aerith, so Aerith, Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa. I'm trying to fight the glare there. And then over here on the side, you've got a Chocobo and a Toad. And here's a look at what's on the back of the box. It's really just kind of pictures of the characters, of the figures themselves, and the characters down below. So this is a pretty cool thing. I paid exactly what it shows up here on the top, which is $29.99 for this thing at a software etc. store in Montana in our mall. Now that was only a handful of the main characters. There's a couple other ones that I did not pick up, but 2 of my other favorite characters from that game had individual releases, so I got the 2 of these, and that is, of course, Sephiroth in his own special package. $19.99 was what I paid for him back then. There's the back of the package. These packages are a little dirty, a little, coming apart in a little bit. The glue is starting to unseal from them, so I'm hoping to kind of stop handling them a whole bunch here soon. And then, of course, my favorite character from the entire series, that's Vincent Valentine. There he is. $19.99 for him as well. There's the back of the package. Very, very, very important parts of my Final Fantasy collection. Like I said, I can't believe I forgot about them, but it's mainly because they were in my bedroom. I had moved them out of the living room when the window guys came here, which seems like it's been so long ago, and I just kind of forgot that they were in there and not here with the rest of my collection. Alright, let's wrap up this last one with the last 6 games for this part. Galarians, a very interesting kind of sci-fi take on survival horror game. I really enjoy this game and would like to play it again sometime soon. I only have one installment in this particular series of games, but I love these games. This is Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko. The first Gex game is okay. It's completely different from the second and third. The second and third I really love. The second one was called Enter the Gecko, and then you got Deep Cover Gecko. This took the series into 3D. The first game was like a 2D side-scrolling platform-style game. But the second and third went into 3D, and they have comedian Dana Gould doing the voice of Gex, and he's hilarious. The games are hilarious. They are a little dated now. A lot of their references, are from things that were going on 15, 16, 17 years ago. But I still think it's a hilarious game and a good game. I don't know, maybe PlayStation's version of a Banjo-Kazooie style game. Although I will admit they're not as good as a Rare game would be. Alright, we have Grandia. Check out my video about that game if you're interested in more thoughts on it. The Grand Stream Saga. This is a game that I have really, really fond memories of. I guess I wouldn't put it as a favorite game, but it's just a really interesting title. If you could pick that one up, I would recommend it. If you're an RPG fan, it's kind of RPG, action RPG. And then we're going to wrap this particular video up with this game from Activision called Guardians Crusade. This is another RPG game that I picked up because it had some buzz to it, and it looked interesting, and I finally managed to track it down without breaking the bank. Alright, well that's going to wrap us up for part 1 of my Sony PlayStation collection. I hope you enjoyed, and stick around for part 2.